Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Hopefully everybody out there is enjoying a lovely Thursday, April 23rd. That's when this podcast is dropping for everybody out there. I am recording the night of the 22nd, and after I had prepared everything for this episode, gone through all of my notes, the news bomb finally dropped that Major League Baseball has rendered their decision on the Boston Red Sox and what happened in 2018. So we usually start off the show with a coronavirus update, kind of what's going on, what the latest plan is, and we're going to get to all of that good stuff on today's episode as well. But for right now, we're going to start off with this Red Sox punishment, kind of letting you guys know exactly what's going on, giving my feedback on how I think Boston kind of got away with one here. So without further ado, jumping right into it, basically the Red Sox video replay system operator, J.T. Watkins, has been suspended without pay through the 2020 postseason, and the team was stripped of their second-round draft pick this year. Now, there was no fine levied to the Red Sox, such as there was to the Astros of $5 million. The general manager was not suspended for the year. The manager was not suspended for the year. Yes, Alex Cora is still suspended for 2020, but that was due to his role in the Astros sign-stealing scandal and not what happened in Boston the year after. And just initially, right off the top, this is just so light of a discipline. I mean, yes, that second-round pick, typically the contract's worth $1 million, $1.5 million, upwards of even more than that if you kind of get into the nitty-gritty of it there. But right off the top, just looking at Commissioner Rob Manfred's report, what he released, I just can't help but think that this guy swung and missed once again. All the feedback from the Astros scandal, the press conferences thereafter was just that this was pretty much a circus. All of baseball agreed with me with that, kind of conclusion there. But ultimately, what happened here is that, looking through the reports and reading the allegations, let's see, Manfred wrote, quote, "On at least some occasions during the 2018 regular season, the Red Sox utilized game feeds in the replay room in violation of MLB regulations to revise sign sequence information that he had permissibly provided to players prior to the game." So what does that mean in layman's term? It means that the replay guy was watching the game live on television. He was decoding the sign sequence. So when a runner's on second base, you give 2, 3, 4, 5 signs. You can do outs +1, strikes +1, balls -1, whatever it is, to kind of, get on the same page as a pitcher and catcher. Well, Mr. Watkins behind the scene, he was realizing what they would typically do, and then he would update that information for the next day. But then Manfred goes on to say, quote, "Unlike the Houston Astros 2017 conduct, in which players communicated to the batter from the dugout area in real time the precise type of pitch that was about to be thrown, Watkins' conduct, by its very nature, was far more limited in scope and impact." He continues, "The information was only relevant when the Red Sox had a runner on second base, which was only 19.7% of plate appearances league-wide in 2018. And Watkins communicated sign sequences in a manner that indicated that he had decoded them from the in-game feed in only a small percentage of those occurrences. So, what does that mean? Basically, in 2017 Houston, live and in the moment, off-speed pitch, loud bang, trash can, everybody knows it by now, what's going on? Well, apparently in Boston, they were only using this information when there was a runner on second base to relay to the hitter. And this goes on once again and has gone on for years and years and years without the assistance of technology. If the runner on second base is able to decode what's going on his own, that's fair game. So Mr. Watkins, the replay review guy, he would tell the players before the game, new information that he learned yesterday, saying, hey, they like to go outs plus one. So if 1 out, second sign, 2 outs, third sign, et cetera, et cetera. So basically when a guy was on second base, they were now aware of this pattern, and what they do is relay that to the hitter by hand placement or by foot placement. You know, it's not a verbal cue, but if I hang my right hand down and have my left hand on my leg, fastball. If my left hand is hanging there and my right hand is on my leg, off-speed pitch. If both hands are on my leg, change up. You know, similar body language circumstances can be used to get information to the hitter without an audio cue or a verbal cue or anything along those lines. But continuing on here, Manfred wrote that he did not find Alex Cora, his coaching staff, the front office, or most of the players on the team knew or should have known that Watkins was using in-game video to update the information that he had learned from his pre-game analysis. So I just, off the top of my head, oh man, like I said earlier, I think Manfred just swung and missed one more time because Alex Cora, yes, he was released due to the Houston thing. Former GM Dave Dombrowski, he was fired due to everything going on. They recently hired Chaim Bloom. I would think that Dombrowski and everybody, they would be suspended as well here. So long story short of it is, once again, Manfred granted immunity to the players to try to gather information on this. Well, that happened in Houston. And yes, the players were given immunity from suspensions or punishment or everything like that, but they were not given immunity from people like me, from other players, from other members of the media, and everybody knows that 2017 is now tainted in what was going on. So if you're a Red Sox guy and you now know this, even if you are granted immunity, what's the motivation to tell the truth? Why would I give you what you want when even if, you're not going to suspend me, but everybody in America is going to hate us. Everybody outside of Boston is going to be looking down on what happened. And it's just like, I don't know. Maybe it's the expectation, with the Houston punishment and then the feedback of it not being as harsh or as bad as it should have been. I thought Manfred probably would have come down harder on the Red Sox because if, he didn't learn his lesson from the Houston fiasco, okay, I got to go a little bit harder when it comes to Boston and what I find there. Well, apparently he figured out that, he didn't get enough information to, punish the players. And he's quoted as saying, even if the players were able to be punished, none of them did anything to the point where that, would have happened. So nobody would have been suspended anyway. And nothing was happening live. So it is nowhere near as bad as what Houston was doing in 2017. Once again, that was live in the moment, prior to the pitch, after the sign goes down. There's literally 3 seconds to which it could happen, and it was. As to where Boston, essentially some guy was sitting behind a monitor watching the game, decoding the pitch sequence, and then relaying that information, whether it's later in the game or the next day, to the players, and basically having them utilize that as they will. Well, none of the players were asking how he was finding this, how it was, happening, whether it was live or not live. Obviously, Alex Cora didn't really care because he came from Houston, so he knew what was going on. It's a real fine line. And back to last episode when I ranked the best of the best, and we're going to do that later in this week's episode for the AL Central, I kept the 2018 Red Sox off of the top of their list just because they quote-unquote cheated. Well, maybe, did they? I don't, 20% of the time. Manfred is basically saying this was the only time that information was used because if you're a runner on first base or third base, you can't see into the catcher's sign to relay that information. So the only time it happens is when a guy is on second base. And That was apparently 20% of the time in all of 2018. So how much did it really affect what was going on? And I would love to know the information. I didn't look it up. Again, this kind of came out right before I was due to record this episode, but I would love to know their batting average with runners in scoring position, or more specifically, runners on second base, and find out how much more successful they were. Because at the end of the day, the hitters still knew what pitch was coming, whether, it wasn't all the time, but it was in this exact instance. So I don't know if Manfred said, it only happened 20% of the time, so I only got to give him 1/5 of the punishment. But I just think Commissioner Manfred missed once again on this, docking 1 draft pick. No fine, no suspensions outside of the replay review guy. I mean, who cares? So he can't, be in the box this next season. It feels extremely light. And based on the reaction of you guys, the listeners out there who have, reacted to Twitter and everything like that, I'm in the majority for this response. But that wraps up the first segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. What we're going to do now, we're going to pause for a word from one of our sister shows within the network here. And then when we come back, there's actually updated information about the minor leagues. Major League Baseball and the minor leagues came to an agreement, and things are going to change moving forward. So stick around. We'll be right back.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, and thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, this is episode number 182 of the Baseball Podcast. Hopefully everybody out there has already gone on to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you're listening to this speaker, all different types of platforms. But leave us a review. Rate the podcast. I know we're up to, I believe it is 12 ratings now, up to 12 5-star ratings for the podcast on Apple Podcasts. So I appreciate everybody out there who has given us a rating, and no new reviews for this week. Once again, if you guys write something, I'll read it here on the show, get you some airtime and give you some feedback on what's going on. If you have questions, feel free to ask those in the review segment. We'll answer those here on the podcast for you. But last episode, we talked about it. The Red Sox decision has come down, taking away a second-round draft pick, suspending Cora, who was already suspended, and then Mr. Watkins, the video review guy. So very light sentencing for the Red Sox. So in this segment, however, transitioning, still staying away from coronavirus here, it's nice to have something else to talk about within Major League Baseball than the coronavirus and what potentially could happen moving forward. We'll get to that in the next segment. But for right now, Major League Baseball and Minor League Baseball, or the MILB, they apparently have come to an agreement. Again, this is all reports. Nothing has been released as final. Obviously, statements from the league say, hey, everything that's being reported is all hearsay. Nothing is set in stone, blah, blah, blah. But basically what's come out is that the major leagues are going to get their way when it comes to this. So they wanted to cut a lot of minor league programs last year, and the MILB pushed back, obviously, because they're like, hey, this is what we do. This is how we make our money. Well, a lot of things change in the pandemic, and a lot of things have changed in the last few months. And basically now the decision or the partnership has been agreed upon where for every team, for every major league team, there's going to be 4 full season minor league affiliates. And when I say full season, that means 110, 120 plus games. For you diehard fans out there listening to this, you know there are short season minor league teams that are typically used for draft picks or recent free agent signings. You know, the kids who go to college get drafted in June. Well, then August, September, October, they go to short season minor league. For the Phillies, being a local guy here in Philadelphia, that's Williamsport, the Crosscutters. You know, they play 50 games kind of up there. Well, those affiliates will no longer be, and there's only going to be one rookie level team. And this rookie ball team will be at the spring training complex of the Major League affiliate. That's another change from before. So 4 full season affiliates, basically keeping the standard AAA, AA, high A ball, and single A ball. Right now there are 3 levels of A ball, low A, mid A, and high A. One of those will be disappearing from everybody's organization. And then within rookie ball, there are currently 2, maybe 3 rookie ball teams for every organization. So right off the top of the bat, you're going to now have 5 minor league affiliates instead of about 7 or 8 from the past. So what does this mean exactly? It means that up to 40 to 45, I think the number being thrown out was 42 teams are going to be quote-unquote cut or removed from Major League affiliation, ultimately taking it from about 160 minor league teams down to 120. And, you know, personally, my initial reaction, my gut reaction is, yeah, that sounds about right. You know, baseball is one of the only sports that has this intense of a minor league system. Football, there's 0 minor league system. I guess you could count the XFL or the AAF, who both made it, I think, 2.5 months when they tried to do it as a minor league kind of feeder system. Basketball does have the G League, but that is one level with 15 guys for each team. Hockey has the AHL, the American Hockey League. Again, one team for every major league team. And then, baseball. They have 7 of them. And it's 30 guys per team, 7 teams, 6 teams, 180 guys. I don't think you need that many. And it's, you know, it's a shame because myself as a Division I baseball player, lower level Division I, your goal or dream is to play kind of minor league baseball, knowing that a lot of times that's where you're ultimately going to cap out. And it is taking away that dream or that opportunity from a lot of people. I mean, if you cut 40 teams times 30 people, you know, do the math real quick. What is that? Carry the 2, add a couple zeros. Almost 1,000 guys to, 1,200 guys are now going to be out of a job. It's certainly difficult, but it's money saving for these teams. That's 1,200 guys. Each team no longer has to pay, even if they're paying each one of those guys $50,000. Do that math again. Let's see. Carry the 2 times 50. That's millions and millions of dollars that they're now going to be saving. So the follow-up, however, and the next step of the conversation, and this is one that a lot of people won't think about, but something that I'm very proud of baseball looking into, and being a business major through college, understanding that these minor league teams that they're going to cut or remove will have an effect on the local economy wherever they are located, because some of these teams are kind of the lifeblood of the town, or reason people work at the town. Again, they're employing workers. Ushers is the word I'm looking for. I was going to say custodians, but I guess they have those as well. Ushers, security, announcers, what have you, parking attendants, all of the above. They save money not having to pay these guys, but these are now individuals all out of work. And locally, Reading, Pennsylvania, they're going to maintain, but there's not a lot to do in Reading outside of the Reading Fightin' Phils, and that ballpark sells out all the time. So the conversation that they have had is they're discussing things along the lines of unaffiliated wood bat leagues, similar to the summer collegiate baseball leagues that are out there. I myself played in 3 of those leagues. I played in the Atlantic Collegiate Baseball League, the ACBL, the Hawaii Collegiate Baseball League, the HCBL, and then the Texas Collegiate League, the TCL. And they're going to do something very similar to this. Obviously, it won't be college prospects that will be involved. It will be individuals who have since graduated and potentially trying to stay in the game of baseball. These are more so known as the independent baseball leagues, because you're still going to have the stadiums at these places. You're still going to have the facilities and the ability to have baseball. So you might as well use that. It's just a matter of the MLB and the MILB no longer having to pay for or worry about compensation for these individuals. And, again, it's the 4 full seasons, AAA, AA, High A, Single A. Those are, your top levels anyway. So the teams that are being cut are full of people who just got drafted or international signees, free agent signees, undrafted free agents from college. So these guys they can still play in this type of league, an independent league, and then be signed to affiliate baseball when they get to the High A level or whatever level they're able to transfer over to. It's just a shame, baseball in kind of the backwoods of America, people like to say. Again, locally it'd be Williamsport, it would be Lakewood, New Jersey, I believe that would get axed for the Phillies, and then a couple of rookie ball leagues down in the state of Florida would be removed. So feeling for the people of Lakewood, the people of Williamsport, home of the Little League World Series, when that's not going on. They have the cross-cutters that they basically support baseball up there, and it's a big part of their economy. So hopefully they can find a team or a league outside of Major League Baseball to kind of come in and stabilize things. But it really is a testament to what this pandemic has done, because 6 months ago, MILB was like, no way, we can't do this. And now with cost-cutting measures, not having fans and stands, everybody worried about how quote-unquote normal things are going to become once again. They basically were like, hey, yeah, now this sounds like a plan. If we're saving millions and millions of dollars from, 1,200 people paying them $50,000, whatever it may be, that's something we got to look at. So very interesting from Major League Baseball. Again, nothing is, confirmed, so to speak. This is all reports from sources and what have you, but I would put some money on that this is ultimately going to be the case, and that they are going to cut up to 42 teams and a few from each major league team. But that wraps up this segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, we're going to pause right now for a word from one of our sister shows. When we come back, then we'll do our coronavirus talk and the latest report on what the plan is for Major League Baseball to return. So hang around with us.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I appreciate you guys listening in today. If you haven't done so already, do me a favor quick. Head to the social media. Head to Facebook and Twitter. Those are the main two where the Baseball Podcast is involved. I have a Facebook page I am now running, posting articles pretty much every day on there, keeping you up to date on what is going on around the league, what we're going to talk about in the next episode. That way you guys can, be ahead of the game. If you follow us there, you'll know before anybody else what we're going to discuss. And then on Twitter, that's a great platform to interact with the fans. You guys can direct message me on there or hit up my DMs for everybody who knows what's going on. You can slide in with a question, comments, let me know how to improve the show, what you want to hear about, what's going on, as well as you can stay up to date with everything baseball, all the information. I'll be sharing with you there, communicating from the experts, all the reports, sharing that stuff, so you can stay up to date with everything that's going on in the baseball world. But for this upcoming segment, this is our coronavirus talk segment. Normally we lead off the show with what's going on here, but actually we had some other stuff to talk about, thank goodness. The Red Sox, their punishment was finally given out, as well as minor league baseball. The entire formation of minor league baseball is going to change, and, with the coronavirus and the reports moving forward, there is now a latest updated plan. So the Major League Baseball basically is leaking out information, looking for feedback from the fans, from everybody, from the players as well. Now, they're not saying they're doing this, but that's absolutely what's going on. And it started out with, hey, everybody's going to go to Arizona. We're going to quarantine the players. We're going to put them in a hotel. We're going to use Phoenix, 10 surrounding sites. We can do that. Well, the pushback from the players that everybody has basically been given is nobody is going to do that without their families. If their family is unable to be with them, it's not going to happen. Carlos Correa voiced his displeasure. Clayton Kershaw voiced his displeasure. Zach Wheeler for the Phillies basically said it was a no-no. Mike Trout, the biggest name in the entire sport, came out, said it was a no-no. The one reason being the family. The second is a lot of these guys' wives, girlfriends, whatever it may be, they're expecting or are pregnant with their first child here over the course of the summer, and nobody's going to miss that or miss the following 48, 72 hours. So they're certainly going to leave, and if you have to come back and quarantine for 2 weeks, it gets interesting because the season may only be a month, 2 months old. So how many games does that equate to? Well, then it came out Arizona and Florida using spring training facilities. We'll kind of split the league into the Cactus and the Grapefruit League. We'll just use those locations. It's closer logistically. Everybody will be fine. Now we're on to a third report here, and it's adding a third location to the mix. So Florida, Arizona, they're still being talked about. Well, now the state of Texas has been added to the conversation. Okay, I thought, why would we do that? Well, you read the report and you read about some availability, and it makes a little bit of sense for sure, because you can kind of split it up to 3 locations, 10 teams in each location. And in Texas, utilizing the new Texas Rangers Stadium, as well as the Houston Astros Stadium, both of those parks have retractable roofs. And that means no rainouts. Baseball cannot have any delays, any rainouts. Hey, it's going to rain the next 3 days, so we can't play at all, which means now we got to play triple headers instead of double headers. Well, they obviously can't have that be the case. So both of those parks have roofs, as well as the University of Texas has an excellent facility. There's a double-A team in Frisco that has an excellent facility. The Baylor Bears have an excellent facility in Waco. So there are multiple stadiums that can be used. And yes, it is not, hey, we're just going to sit here and play in this one stadium. So there will be some travel involved. Airplanes will still not be in the equation. But from Dallas to Houston, it is about 4 to 5 hours. 4.5 without traffic, but sometimes it could be 5 or 6. I made that drive back in the day when it took a little bit longer than it should have and a little bit frustrating. So it makes sense. Okay, so you have roofs, and one stat that popped out to me here, just quick FYI, but Houston last year played 7 out of 81 potential games with the roof open, whether it was rain or just heat, humidity. I spent a summer just west of Houston down there in a little town called Weimar, Texas, just north of Victoria, which was kind of the larger city in between. And it was regularly 104, 105, 106 up on the scoreboard, even at 7 o'clock when first pitch was happening. So it is still hot down there by the Gulf of Mexico, and it is a humid heat in Houston. It's a little bit drier heat up in Dallas as you get further away from the Gulf, but down by Houston, man, it's hot. I could take my jersey off and wring that thing after the game, and water/sweat would just come dripping out of it. So that's why they need the roof, keep it to a nice temperature, multiple games per day at each location. Like I said earlier, they're talking about 10 teams per state, which would limit the amount of players in one location. God forbid if there was something to happen, somebody was to get sick, and they're talking about mass spread. If one guy gets sick and everybody's staying at the same hotel, well, then everybody gets sick. Well, now they're kind of breaking it up to thirds and almost hedging their bets on regards to, well, if, somebody gets sick, it's only going to affect a third of the league and not the entire league. So it's an interesting conversation that could be had, as well as in Arlington, the old Rangers Stadium. They haven't torn that down yet. Yes, they converted it, I believe, into more of a football stadium, but you could still work out. You could still have practice. There are now 4 clubhouses that are, quote unquote, major league type, niceness, space, whatever it may be, not minor league showers, things along those lines, that teams could still practice on off days or before games or take batting practice, throw, things like that, that would allow them to have a workout area that is under control and basically where they don't have to worry about anything. So it certainly is an interesting conversation, and I kind of like the 3 split here, 10, 10, and 10. The only thing I'm having trouble deciding, and I haven't seen anything reported or written about it, is how the playoffs would work. I've gone through a couple of different scenarios mentally trying to figure it out. Would it be, let's see, because they wouldn't do leagues, NL, AL, it would kind of just be everybody. So do you get the top 8 total teams and then put them all in one location and send everybody else home? Whether it's records, I don't know, because you can't do the head-to-head. As well as it may be tricky. I don't know the exact names of the teams that would be in every location, but think about it. Maybe you have the Yankees, the Twins, and then the Orioles, the Blue Jays, the Tigers, the Mets, Giants, all of them in one location. Well, of course, those teams, the Yankees, in this fictional scenario would be a top team because those other teams are all rebuilding. And then in another spot, you have all the 500 teams who would beat each other up. But that way, if you go based on record, none of those other teams would make it, and clearly the Yankees and Twins would. If you do a tournament per each location and then bring the top 4 together, do you do the top 8 out of 10, have them play until they get down to 1? Then you have 3 winners and a 4th team that was the best out of everybody else? Or do you have all the runner-ups play each other in a round robin? How does that work? Or, football style, is it 2 from each location? The top 2 records ultimately get buys. The next guys play each other, 4 of them, and then they play 4 again, 2-1, with 6 teams in the National Football League. Well, I guess they just added somebody at 7 now, so it's only one of them's getting a bye. I still got to get used to that. But is it 7 then? Do you take, the top 7 teams and do it NFL style, or do you go 8 like basketball or the NHL does? And nobody's talking about it, obviously, because that's way down the line and nowhere near at the top of the quote-unquote worry list, for lack of a better term. But it's interesting decisions to be had. And there is guarded optimism that this plan could come together and could ultimately take place. Florida, Arizona, and Texas throwing its hat in the ring. The Texas governor very much on board with this. He's fighting to get NASCAR in his state to get the economy back. So it's interesting. Keep an eye out on it. Again, weekly, we seem to be getting reports about, the latest. Everybody was going to go to Japan and play, right? Didn't we talk about that 2 weeks ago? That seems like a distant memory and fairy tale juice, based on conversation now. So main takeaway is that Arizona only plan isn't going to happen based on the feedback by the players, and, baseball is trying to figure out what the next move is here. So, that wraps up this segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We're going to pause right now for a word from one of our sister shows, but when we get back, we're going to get into my favorite part of the show, where I'm talking about the best of the best. This week, it's the AL Central. So first, I'm going to give you guys all the teams I thought about, and then following up with that, we're going to rank them 1 through 5. So stick around. I think you guys are going to like this.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. This is episode number 182 of the Baseball Podcast. I appreciate everybody listening out there. Head to the social media pages. I know I ask you all the time, but please do so. That helps us spread the word here of the Baseball Podcast, as well as the Podcast Network. You know, whether you guys are into baseball, football, all sports, news, music, movies, politics, pets, whatever it may be, the GSMC has a podcast for you. So share the network with your friends. They may not be baseball fans. Well, you don't have to share this podcast, but tell them to check out the network because they got something for everybody. So we appreciate you guys listening. We appreciate you interacting with us here. But we've had a great show so far. Talked about the update with the Boston Red Sox. What's going on? They've fired their replay tech. Cora still can't coach. No second-round draft pick. Those were the biggest takeaways. I think it's a little bit light, in my opinion, but, what are you going to do? Manfred's kind of been missing all offseason here. So, next up, minor league baseball we talked about. They're going to have a new structure. 4 full-season teams, 1 rookie ball team, down from about 7 where they are now total, down to 5. We then talked about the latest report with how baseball is going to return to play here as soon as possible. Texas, Florida, and Arizona being the 3 locations. But now it's time for, the best of the best segment. I'm trying to come up with a clever name on what's going on, but I really can't do it. So if you guys have something out there, again, social media, hit me up. Let me know what you want me to call it here. We did the American League East last time, coming to the conclusion that the 1998 Yankees would win the all-time best of that division. Well, now we're doing the Central, and this time I did it in alphabetical order right off the top of the bat, starting off with the Chicago White Sox. Their third best team, in my opinion, was the 2000 team. They only made it to the ALDS, but they did win 95 games. Then again in 1993, they lost the ALCS to the Toronto Blue Jays, who we had last week as the top team for the Blue Jays ever. They had 94 wins for the White Sox that year. But the best White Sox team in the history of the Chicago White Sox, again, this is post World War I, World War II. Yes, I know the history of the White Sox back in what have you. Well, I'm talking more in my lifetime, being a millennial, just over 30 years old. Again, everything from 1970-ish on is kind of where I'm trying to keep things. If somebody really stands out before that, we'll share them, and that does happen here in a little bit. But the 2005 White Sox, they swept the World Series, 99 wins, their most recent title, a really good ball club there. And it's a team that I typically forget about. When you name the World Series champions, I always miss the 2005 White Sox. And, again, I didn't realize they swept the World Series till I was doing research to talk to you guys about all this. Well, the next team, it's a shame because there's always one. In the AL East, who was it? Tampa Bay hadn't won a World Series. Well, the Indians haven't won one since 1947. And again, keeping it more recent here, that team didn't make the list. So 2007, they lost the ALCS in 7 games, They won 96 games that year in the regular season, had a really good ball club. The next one up is 2017. They actually had 102 wins and lost in the ALDS. That was a tough year for Cleveland because their number one team, and the team that I have, was the 2016 version, the version the year before, that went to the World Series and ultimately fell to the Chicago Cubs in 7 games. Well, they had 94 wins that year, again, lost in 7 games, probably would have won the World Series if there wasn't a rain delay in the 9th inning, I think it was, may have been the 8th inning, but late in that game, forced everybody to go back into the clubhouse, kind of reset. And the Cubs seemed to take advantage of that, 2 to 3 inning sprint in a Game 7 of the World Series. One of the most outlandish things I think I've ever seen, thinking about it now. We're in Game 7, an inning, 2 innings left, and we got to go reset in a tie ball game. Well, that team won 94 games, made it to Game 7 of the World Series. They came back the next year and won 102 games and couldn't get out of the first round. So that 17 club may have been a bit better, but ultimately, didn't advance as far, so I gave it to the 16 squad. Next up, the Detroit Tigers. 1984, the top team for the Tigers. They won the World Series that year. They had 104 wins. Really impressive ball club. We'll talk more about some of the individuals there in next segment, but this was the year I was talking about. Number 2, I have 1968. That should tell you all you need to know as a Detroit Tigers fan. The closest or the most recent team we got is number 3, 2011. Lost the ALCS, had 95 wins, but 68, 103 wins, and then 1984, 104 wins. So strong clubs back in the day for the Tigers, but not so much recently. I think even last year, what'd they lose, 115 games or something like that? Man, it was just a remarkable number even looking at it going, wow, I knew they were bad, but I didn't think they were that bad. So the Kansas City Royals, they're up next here. The third best team in the history of the Royals. This is a very recent list, more so than not. But the number 3 team was the 2014 Royals, who lost the World Series. Yes, made it to the World Series with only 89 wins. Following up here, I was doing some research on the least amount of wins to win the World Series. This next team that we finish up the division with is one of the close ones here. But 2014 for the Royals, lost the World Series. The number 2 team was the 1985 Kansas City Royals, who won the World Series. So look at that, the AL Central back in the day. 84, the Tigers won, and then in 85, the Royals won. They only had 91 wins that year and ended up winning the World Series. And then the best version of the Kansas City Royals, in my opinion, the 2015 version. They won the World Series, back-to-back World Series appearances there in 14 and 15. They lost in 14, got back in 2015 and ended up winning it with 95 wins. I believe they beat the Mets that year. The New York Mets get it and lose. Ultimately, that makes me happy as a Phillies fan. But the 2015 Kansas City Royals are the best version of that squad, and they were a really good team, man. They put the ball in play. There's a lot of statistics there. Now that I'm thinking about it again, thinking back to that year, that were a lot of fun to watch and very impressive from an overall standpoint. But the last team in the division here, wrapping things up, let's see. The Minnesota Twins. And the third best team for the Twins that I have is the 2019 version. Unfortunately, they continue to run into the New York Yankees, it seems, every time they make the playoffs. And that's a hurdle that they've just been unable to get over. Yankee Stadium, in particular, is a place that they haven't figured out how to win. A friend of mine, Ryan Presley, was on the squad for a few years back there for the Twins. I saw him in New York. They would lose almost every time they were there. They made it as a wild card when he was on the squad. He didn't get into that game, but took a 3-0 lead, I think it was, in the first inning, then gave it right back in the bottom of the first, ended up losing. But the 2019 version, they had 101 wins last year and then got swept in the ALDS by the Yankees. So it's just like, oh man, if you're a Twins fan, that Yankees team, the evil empire, so to speak, that they've gone as, they just continue to dig you guys. The second best team for the Twins, 1987, won the World Series, only winning 85 games. I think that was third lowest amongst World Series winners. We'll get to the rest of them here, but off the top of my head, I think it was the Cardinals and the Giants of 2010 and 2011, potentially. The Giants were 2010. I can't really remember the Cardinals. But the best team in Minnesota Twins history, in my opinion, was the 1991 squad. They won the World Series that year as well. They had 95 wins, so unlike 87 with 85, were able to win 95 games in 1991 on their way to winning the World Series. So, a brief reminder, top to bottom here. We're going to rank them in the next segment. So, this is just alphabetical. 2005 Chicago White Sox, 2016 Cleveland Indians, 1984 Detroit Tigers, 2015 Kansas City Royals, and the 1991 Minnesota Twins. And that wraps it up for this segment. Like I said, I'm excited to get to next segment and rank these guys for you, kind of get your thoughts on where you think ultimately they would finish up. But I appreciate everybody listening out there. We're going to pause for a word from one of our sister shows here at the Baseball Podcast. And, when we come back, like I said, I'm going to rank these guys. And I appreciate everybody who reached out to me about the AL East and where they think things are going to finish. I did get some feedback from my old man. He let me know I mispronounced some names on the 1970 Orioles team. Forgive me again. I wasn't around then, so I didn't know exactly how to pronounce all those guys. So if I do this again here moving forward, talking about the 84 Tigers, feel free to reach out once again and set me straight. But let's pause right now, hang around with us, guys, and then we'll have some fun letting you know where I think they'd finish. Stick with us.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, I appreciate everybody listening today. This is the 5th segment of today's episode. I know you're thinking to yourself, hey, you usually do these combined segments 3 and 4. Well, yeah, that's how I prepped it for today's episode, but then the Boston Red Sox and that entire scandal came to a conclusion, and they released their punishment, so I had to throw that in at the top of the episode for everybody here, which pushed everything back a segment. So no harm. We're going to roll with the punches here at the Baseball Podcast for everybody out there. I am Kevin Mahalik. Once again, this is episode number 182 of the Baseball Podcast. Hopefully you guys have been listening here for the past couple of weeks and can follow along with our best of the best segments that we're currently running through here. Last segment, I talked to you guys about each individual team and their top 3 potential teams, to pick from here with the top of the top. And now that I know the number 1 squad for each of them, putting them into a ranking, talking about each team in a little bit more detail. From 5 to 1, let's have some fun here. Let's go. Number 5, the 2016 Cleveland Indians. Once again, the Indians are just at the bottom based on the fact that they didn't win the World Series. There's nothing else to talk about. The Rays were at the bottom in the East, and now the Indians are. This team may have been better than some of these other ones, but didn't ultimately get it done, losing in 7 games to the Cubs. A tough break for them here. But the lineup itself, very impressive. Yan Gomes behind the dish. Let's see, Mike Napoli hitting 34 dingers, 100 RBIs that year. Jason Kipnis, Francisco Lindor, only 22 years old at this point. He was still finding himself. You know, he only had 15 and 78. He did hit 301, but now he's going to be the next guy who's possibly getting that $400 million, $300+ million. Bryce Harper, Manny Machado, Mike Trout, and then Lindor next up on that list there. Jose Ramirez was only 23 at this point. He only had 11 home runs for him. He's since really turned it on and come a player. Rajai Davis, Carlos Santana, he was dropping bombs at age 30. He had 34 and 87, hitting 259. So a strong club. From a hitting perspective. From a pitching side of things, Corey Kluber, 18-9, 215 innings pitched, a 3.14 ERA. He was the strongest at the top of that rotation. Carlos Carrasco had a really nice year, 3.32 ERA and 140 innings. Trevor Bauer, Josh Tomlin, Danny Salazar, and then looking at the bullpen, Cody Allen on the back end, a 2.51 ERA, 68 innings. Dan Otero, he had a 1.53 ERA, kind of an unsung hero in the setup role for them there. Brian Shaw, that's a name that everybody has since, come to be familiar with. So a very good ball club, but just couldn't win that final game. Again, should have if the rain and the floods didn't open up and they had to reset. But that's the way the cookie crumbles, to quote Bruce Almighty back in the day. So number 4 is the 1991 Minnesota Twins. They were led by Chili Davis, designated hitter, 29 home runs, 93 RBIs for Chili, having a strong year, hitting 277, as well as Kirby Puckett out in center field. Everybody knows Kirby. He hit 319 that year, 15 home runs, 89 RBIs. Let's see, Greg Gagne, Chuck Knobloch was on that team. I know Chuck more from his time for the Yankees, but he had 25 stolen bases, hitting 281. Only one home run, obviously, second baseman, not a big home run guy, but Kent Herbeck had 20 dingers for him, 89 RBIs, hitting 284. Brian Harper at the top of the lineup, hitting 311. So a strong team for the Twins there offensively. And from a pitching side of things, 3 guys over 200 innings. At the top of the list, you got Jack Morris, 18-12. He was 36 at this point, still throwing 246 innings. Again, just the amount of innings these guys used to throw is just astronomical compared to today. It really is. If you hit 200 today, it's like, oh man, he's a workhorse. Well, these guys were 250. What was it, the 70 Orioles? The guy was at like 300 innings. Fascinating. Scott Eckerson won 20 games that year. Looks like as their number 3. He had a 3.18 ERA and 200 innings, went 20-8. Kevin Tapani, 16-9 in 244 innings. Closer Rick Aguilera, I think I got that one right. I know I messed some up last time, but he was closing for him. He finished 60 games, 4-5, 2.35 ERA. It's a good squad for the 91 Twins. And again, if the 2019 version would have won it all, I would have put them number 1. But you got to win the series if you want to be included in my best of the best. That's just a matter of fact. So next up in third place, I got the 2015 Kansas City Royals. Like I said, this team just there were no easy outs offensively. They didn't strike out. That was the biggest thing. And now in 2020 with the home run or strikeout or walk philosophy that people are implementing offensively, go back and watch this team. I think there was a game against the Mets at this time, maybe it was Matt Harvey, where I think they had 2 swings and misses the entire game. Even if they were fooled, they were just able to battle things off and foul pitches off. And they didn't have a guy hit over 22 home runs and yet scored a lot of runs because it was put the ball in play, make the defense make a play, a lot of stolen bases, a lot of guys in motion. It was just a fun team to watch play baseball. And Salvador Perez behind the dish, Eric Hosmer at first base, Omar Infante, Mike Moustakas, Alex Gordon, Lorenzo Cain, Alex Rios. All solid, if not above average ball players. Ben Zobrist off the bench doing well for him. It's just, I remember this team now that I'm talking about it. I remember watching them going, man, I would have hated to pitch against these guys because multiple times a pitcher would make a heck of a pitch and they would just spoil it, just foul it off. Oh, here comes the mistake pitch. Boom, double. Everybody go. It was like, man, just fun to watch. But from the pitching side, Edison Volquez, 200 innings at the top, 13-9. I mean, look at these win-losses here. Nothing outstanding. Just solid team. 13-9, 13-8, 8-8, 7-8, 11-6, 4-7. Nobody really, went above and beyond. But Chris Young at 11-6, Johnny Cueto, Danny Duffy, Giordano Ventura. It's like, man, just fun, solid baseball team. And then, the bullpen. Ryan Madsen. I'm a Phillies guy. Madsen was another stud. He had another good year for them at 2.13 ERA. Greg Holland, solid. Kelvin Herrera. Wade Davis. Just a really fundamentally sound and really well put together ball club. Shout out to the general manager who put this together, because this isn't a team that scares you come regular season. It's really not. One night, this team's not going to scare you. But if you have to beat this team 4 out of 7 times, you couldn't do it. And that was the problem. They'd frustrate the heck out of you by the end of it. Next up, I have the 2005 Chicago White Sox. Again, they swept the World Series. A.J. Pierzynski behind the dish, catching for him. Everybody knows A.J., a solid ball player. First baseman Paul Konerko. He was their big bopper. 40 home runs, 100 RBIs, hitting 283. Heck of a year from Konerko. Tadahito Iguchi at second base. Juan Uribe. Let's see, Scott Pasednik, Aaron Rowand. Shout out Aaron Rowand. I love Aaron Rowand because he ran into the fence in Philadelphia not long thereafter. Forever has a wonderful place in my heart. Jermaine Dye, Pablo Ozuna. Just names, man. Just a solid ball club led by Konerko offensively. And then moving over to the bump, Freddie Garcia, before Freddie fell off, he went 14-8 this year in 228 innings. Man, look at these horses. 4 guys over 200 innings. Mark Burley, everybody remembers lefty Mark Burley, 236 innings. Freddie Garcia, 228. John Garland, 221. And Jose Contreras at 204. All of them won at least 14 games. The bullpen consisted of Dustin Hermanson closing things out. Luis Vizcaíno coming out of the bullpen. Really, really good club. Really solid club, and just their best, in my opinion. Those guys at the top of their games are slightly better than what the Royals would put together. But our last team and my best team in the history of the American League Central is the 1984 Tigers. Just looking at it here, Lance Parrish behind the dish had 33 home runs and 98 RBIs. Those are tremendous offensive numbers for a catcher. There's no catchers in today's game putting up those type of numbers. Locally here in Philadelphia, JT Realmuto being the top catcher in the game. He's not hitting 33 and 98. First base, Dave Bergman. Second base, Lou Whitaker. Alan Trammell at shortstop, Howard Johnson. Chet Lemon in the outfield. Kirk Gibson playing right field for him, hitting 27 and 91, hitting 282 on the year. A really good club. Going to the mound here, Jack Morris, 19 wins this year with a 3.6 ERA and 240 innings. Dan Petrie, Milt Wilcox, Dave Rozema. I got down. I'm not even going to try to pronounce Juan Beringer. I know I messed that one up so you guys can get at me. Closer Willie Hernandez, and then Ario Lopez. They must have went back and forth from the bullpen, because 140 innings for a closer. I know it's 1984, but you guys are going to have to let me know how a relief guy can throw 140 innings and then another relief guy throwing 137. That's pretty crazy. But the 1984 Tigers, number 1. 2005 White Sox, number 2. 2015 Royals, 91 Twins, and 2016 Indians round out the American League Central. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. I always love looking back and seeing again the names and how they performed in these years, and it's a ton of fun. So let me know if I screwed anything up, or if you really think one is way better than the other. We'll talk about it here on the show. But that wraps up this segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, as always. Here's a word from one of our sister shows, and when we come back, we'll wrap up today's episode. We're going to talk Stratomatic versus Baseball Reference. Again, simulations. That's all we got to talk about. Hang with us.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back, everybody, to the sixth and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, I appreciate everybody listening out there. If you haven't done so, and I know a few of you have, so I'm not talking to you guys anymore. I'm sorry for beating you up, talking about it all the time. But if you're new to today's episode, and this is your first time listening, this is episode 182. So there's 181 backlogged episodes you guys can go back and listen to at your leisure. That's the beauty of the podcast. You can listen at whenever you, I was going to say on your commute to work, but nobody's really doing that anymore. At least the majority of people are not currently doing that. I know some of you Samaritans out there still have to head to work. The nurses, healthcare people on the front lines, let me take a moment, give them a shout out here. It's been 5 segments, so this is long overdue, but they continue to be at the front line of this COVID coronavirus experience. And, personally, I recently found out one of my good friend's fathers has been really affected by this disease. He's been on a ventilator for the past couple of days. He could potentially be turning a corner here, but obviously a serious situation. We're doing everything we can to help and put him in the best situation possible and to help out all the nurses, doctors, and healthcare workers that are providing for him as well. So it's just frustrating not being able to be there. That's probably the worst part about this experience is something like that. You can't be there for your dad or for your loved one or whoever it may be that's being affected by this. So shout out to all the healthcare workers. If you're a healthcare worker listening to this, we love you here. Let us know. Message me. Shoot me a DM. Hit me up on Facebook. Let me know, hey, I'm a healthcare worker. I love the show. I'd love to do something for you out there to hopefully make your life a little bit easier than it's been over the past month or so. But this is the 6th and final segment here. This is our simulation segment. Normally we do it 5th, but we'll do it 6th today due to the Red Sox information coming out. And a little bit of a change here. I normally read through each division, but today I took the time beforehand and I basically put in 3 categories. Strat-O-Matic is one of the simulations, and Baseball Reference being the other. Well, the 3 categories I put them in are the 2 that they agree that the team is going to be good, or that they agree that the team is going to be bad, and then I put people that they really disagree on. So there's really 4. Hey, they agree they're good, they agree they're bad, they disagree completely, and then there's a bunch of teams kind of middle around 500. Like, are they good, are they bad? Nobody really knows. So right off the top, the names on the good list are not going to be surprises to anybody out there. Starting out with the New York Yankees. Both of them think they're above average. The Cleveland Indians. One surprise that kind of had me, or there's 2 surprises in this list, one of them being the Oakland Athletics. Both computer simulations, very high on the Athletics. And now I know they're going to be a good ball club, but them being in Oakland, me being in Philadelphia, it's probably upsetting a few of my local listeners, this being the Golden State Media Podcast, San Francisco, right there by Oakland. Hey, they think you guys are going to be good, man. Both computers are high on the Athletics. The Houston Astros are both good. The Atlanta Braves, I agree with that. I think they're going to win the NL East. The LA Dodgers, and then the Arizona Diamondbacks are the other surprise to me. Once again, I think they're a solid ball club, but both computers are very high on the Diamondbacks, as well as Madison Bumgarner, which, we'll get to here by the end of the show as we talk about some individuals. The next category is they agree that they're bad. The Baltimore Orioles, sorry to these fan bases first and foremost, but both supercomputers think you guys aren't really going to cut it this year. So the Baltimore Orioles, the Toronto Blue Jays, the Detroit Tigers, the LA Angels, that one to me is a bit of a surprise. Again, I'm higher on the Angels than most. Shohei Ohtani returns, Mike Trout, a couple other offseason moves that they made out there. I think they're going to be solid. Anthony Rendon, Justin Upton, Albert Pujols. If they can pitch, then maybe that's what the computer thinks. They won't be able to pitch. But I think they got a solid club out there in LA. But the final two in the bad category are the San Francisco Giants. Yup. And the New York Mets. Again, that makes me happy as a Phillies fan. I'm sorry for you Mets people out there, but I don't know if they're going to be that high. And then the disagree column is starting with the Tampa Bay Rays. One of them thinks they're not very good. The other has them high. I personally think they're going to be good. The Seattle Mariners, I don't think they're going to be any good. So, put them down into the bad category. But, I didn't write which one has them good and which one has them bad, so I don't want to call any of them out. Just know that it's one yes, one no, essentially, for these teams. But the Miami Marlins, no, they're not. Stop it. Just whatever computer has them at the top, just reset that algorithm, because that's not going to happen. The Philadelphia Phillies, let's go. Come on. They're the best. No, seriously, I think they're around 500. I think it's Baseball Reference has them as the worst team in the league, or second worst. I don't see them being that bad with, additions they've made, people they're getting back, Joe Girardi. I don't think they're going to be good, but I don't think they're bad. The Pittsburgh Pirates, I guess, they could get hot, make a run. The Chicago Cubs, that's one as well. The Chicago White Sox, too. So the city of Chicago can't figure it out. We've talked about that at length in, podcasts past, how the Windy City can't be figured out by the computers. And then the Colorado Rockies and the San Diego Padres. I think both of those teams are going to be at the bottom of their division. And, so, the simulation that has them at the top, I think it's just an early good season schedule for them here early on. But talking about some individual performances, what I like to get into, batting average, wins, all of the above. Jimenez for the White Sox hitting 390 in Stratomatic. So we are officially everybody's under 400. What date is it? The 23rd. A month into this season, I talked about what the over-under would be when everybody drops below 400. It's officially happened in Stratomatic. Jimenez is being trailed by Brett Gardner at 386, Charlie Blackmon at 386, Marte, Lopez, Edman, Andrews, all these guys hitting above 370, having great starts to the year. Who's leading the league in home runs? It is still Trevor Story. Jimenez right behind him at 10 with Lindor. Francisco Lindor trying to get paid, hitting those 10 dingers. And Jimenez, Lindor, and Nelson Cruz at the top of the league with 26 RBIs apiece in Stratomatic. So let's compare that over here to Baseball Reference. Wow, they still have Dahl over 500. David Dahl out in Colorado hitting 407. And oh, look at that. Carlos Santana. He got hot here this past week. He's now up to 402. If Carlos Santana hits 402, I'm going to be so frustrated as a baseball fan, because the Phillies signed him to, I think, a 3-year, $60 million deal, $20 million a year, and he was okay in year one. He's always been way better when he's been in Cleveland. I don't know if he's just comfortable there. The Phillies traded him to Seattle, then he ended up in Cleveland, but he was nowhere near 402 at any point during his Phillies time. So if he's up that high, man, that would drive me nuts. All right, scrolling down here, home runs. Let's see, we got Franmil Reyes still at 11. Marcus Semien with 10 and quite a few with 9. Torres, Gallo, Stanton, Alvarez. RBI, still Alvarez. Wow, he is way out in front. 37 RBIs for Yordan Alvarez. Next up is Mike Moustakas with 24 and Reyes with 24. Wow, so Reyes has 11 home runs and only 24 RBIs. A ton of solo shots, according to Baseball Reference here when it comes to their simulation. Transitioning over to the mound, let's see who is still wheeling and dealing from a pitching perspective when it comes to Stratomatic. Okay, ERA, here we are. Snell still at the top of the list, 0.87 for Tampa Bay. Steven Strasburg right there at 104. Garrett Cole at 160. Come on, Garrett, pick it up. 1.6. Just kidding, obviously. But Rick Porcello, man, that would be interesting if Rick would able to put it together. Jake Odorizzi doing well. Aaron Nola at 1.98 under 2. So quite a few individuals still with a sub-2 ERA. And then Baseball Reference on the mound. Who do they have? They got Madison Bumgarner at 0.96. Man, is he going to be able to keep doing it? I just feel like he's running out of bullets. I don't know if it's this year, but I think it's going to be sooner than later. Walker Buehler, 1.32 ERA. Dallas Keuchel, 1.50. Freddie Peralta. And, man, they got Rick Porcello here, too, with the Mets at 1.67. The computers are high on Rick Porcello. So if you're a Mets fan, take solace in the fact that Porcello and Matz are up in this list. Strikeouts, Verlander, 59. Scherzer at 50. Cole at 50. Still the names that you would typically see at the top of that list. DeGrom's right there. Hand with 9 saves with Diaz. So standard cast of characters according to these simulations on the mound. A little bit more of a variety offensively, but that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. One last time, I'm going to, ask you to go to social media, head to Facebook, head to Twitter. Those are the main two. Just type in GSMC Baseball into the search bar. You'll be able to find both pages. I'm currently running both pages, so if you ask a question, put a comment on there, we'll get it on the show for you, get some interaction with our fans. But that wraps it up again. Hopefully everybody out there is having a beautiful week. It is Thursday, April 23rd. This was episode number 182 of the Baseball Podcast. I am Kevin Mahalik. Thank you again for listening. Hopefully everybody has a great rest of your night, and we'll talk to you guys on Monday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.